Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, a sobering conversation with a survivor of a school shooting. We'll talk that and more coming up next.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros, joined as always by Billy Hallowell. Billy, it's another tragic day with another school shooting.
Yeah, it's been a rough week. I think the entire nation is reeling every time one of these events happens, trying to understand the why, dealing with the human emotions of all the images that are being seen on TV across the country, across the world. And then you obviously have the deep emotions and sympathy for the families and those who are directly impacted. It has been a rough week, and I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on than Evan Todd, who actually, we've been longtime friends. He's a survivor of Columbine and has really looked a lot at these issues over the years. So, Evan, how you doing today?
All right. How are you?
Good. Evan, every time these events happen, every time we see these shootings unfold, I always think of you immediately because I know you, but I also think, what is going through your mind and your heart every time you turn on a TV and see that another event like this is unfolded?
It's heartbreaking, because I know what's going through those families' minds and going through the students that were involved. I know that it brings those feelings back, and it breaks my heart that people have to experience that kind of the pain and kind of the uncertainty. So and then there are aspects of it because of the time that has passed and the thought that I put into it that's infuriating, that we don't have more school safety measures in place at every single school, that we're not really addressing mental health issues or even our education system that I think is perpetuating these kinds of problems.
Mm. Yeah, and and you bring up the school safety issue, and judging by the looks of it as an outsider, there's a couple things here. One, the police chief did say that the shooter in this case looked at a couple different targets and ended up settling on this school because they thought there'd be less resistance there. There was more security at the other school. And that said, this school had protocols in place, and it looks like the doors were locked, but she shot her way in through the windows, and they did a good job of evacuating the kids out. Obviously, it wasn't enough, as you had 3 kids die and 3 other adults die as well, very tragically. But even when they did a pretty good job, it's just tough.
Yeah. Well, and that's the most infuriating part when I look at these, is most of the protocols that are in place right now, they completely ignore the 2 biggest factors that we need to address. And that's 1, a armed presence to immediately deal with the threat, and then 2, a medical response if something like this happens. Both of those things can save lives, and most of the major, safety protocols, standard response protocols ignore those 2 main facts. The first thing that people do when someone comes into the school and is shooting and trying to kill people, the first thing they do is call for law enforcement. They call for people with guns to come stop it. And so why are we waiting, 7, 10, 15 minutes for police to respond when we can have either armed security, armed teachers, armed staff, or a marshal program? There's a lot of ways, but we need to have an armed presence in our school. It's not a political debate or divide. It's not over the gun. We need to protect our schools. If people want to have other political debates, that's fine. But ask these, the Democrat and the Republican, even some of the that are pushing for gun control measures, ask them how their children are protected in schools, and they will tell you they're protected with guns. Every child should be, and every school and every community should be protected every single day.
Yeah, and you raised a number of interesting issues there. I know you've done a lot of work with helping train teachers, right? This is a big policy debate in this country, whether or not teachers should be allowed in schools to carry firearms. But moving outside of that for a moment, we could talk more about that. But the idea of having somebody armed, you raised an interesting point. Who do you call right away? You call the police to come and neutralize the threat. Why do you think so many schools still don't have maybe that security, whether it's a resource officer, a police officer, or armed teachers? Why has there been either resistance or a reluctance to act on that?
That's one of the $1 million questions. It could be as nefarious as people, that are pushing a certain gun control agenda at high levels don't prioritize kids' lives. They prioritize their political ideology in pushing that agenda. I think there's also a level of apathy, or if it's out of sight, out of mind, people think, oh, this is not going to happen. And this is very rare, but still, I'm not taking those chances with my children. I know auto accidents are very rare, but I still use seatbelt buckles and try to follow safety measures. These are precautions that would stop it. And I think if we had armed staff and security, teachers, however way, that could confront these murderers, when the next school shooter sees that they will be met with force immediately, I think people will lose the initiative to do this. So it's preventative in nature, and it's also proactive in protecting the schools. But I will say this. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish up.
I will say this. I think if parents demand this of their school boards and their principals and their teachers, if the parents rise up and demand this level of protection, it will happen. They'll have no choice but to protect our schools.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of people imagine in their minds, well, we don't want to arm all these teachers or have a marshal there or somebody because we don't want it to militarize our schools. Well, I don't think it would look quite like that. I mean, people can conceal carry. They don't have to be walking around with big giant rifles and military uniforms on. You don't have to do that. But, as long as, they know that there is a presence there. I mean, even this shooter, like I said, chose a quote unquote soft target.
Yes.
So what do you make of that argument? I guess is my question. Sorry, I didn't phrase that in a question, but what do you make of that point that, the militarization point, the fear there that people have with that?
Yeah, sure. And I agree. I don't think we should be terrifying kids with, fully, equipped, military guys with, body armor and ARs and standing at the door. I don't think we need that level of security. But one thing that people have ignored and I think isn't put out there enough, since 1999, there's thousands of schools that have armed staff in it. There was a study done in 2019. Over a 20-year period, there was over 1,000 schools that they followed that had armed staff for 20 years. There was 0 incidents, 0 attempts, 0. The students didn't even know that the teachers were armed and carrying. And I think there is a level of hesitancy from some teachers, some parents, because they, weren't brought up around guns or haven't had experience with guns. And so it's a terrifying fact. But, these same people aren't terrified when they walk by a police officer or a security guard somewhere that is armed, And so having teachers armed, I think has been stigmatized in a bad light by the people who are pushing a gun control agenda. And I think a lot of the narratives come from that regard. If we separate that out and think logically through it, we are trusting these teachers with our children every day. They can have a gun whether we approve it or not. I'd rather, I hold the teachers to that highest standard that if I can trust them with a gun, then I'll trust them with my child.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we are going to take a quick break here on Faith versus Culture. We're going to be back more with Evan Todd, who survived Columbine. We're talking about the latest tragic shooting in Nashville. More after the break. This is Faith versus Culture. All right, we are back here on this episode of Faith versus Culture. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell with me as well. We're talking to Evan Todd, who's a survivor of Columbine, has been outspoken on these issues surrounding school shootings as they've been happening just all too frequently. Talked a lot about the school safety measures in the last segment. I want to shift here, Evan, and get your take on the media reaction, because it seems pretty instantaneously you start to see almost this narrative of, well, her parents rejected her identity, and kind of giving a reason for why she may have done this. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, it's frustrating to see this narrative that's been pushed really since Columbine, since 1999. Back when the two murderers did what they did at Columbine, the media basically said, well, they were picked on, and that was the narrative that went forward. And society perpetuated this fact, and it made murder second to bullying. And that really, I think, is one of the things that's perpetuated this problem. People think, oh, if I'm picked on, if people don't, and I'm not surprised to see our current state of affairs in the world. People are saying, if you don't use my pronouns, then you're hateful, or this and that. People are so concerned with how other people treat them that we're not focused anymore on how we, should treat other people. They want you to treat them a certain way, or else they'll use violence. And that's unacceptable. That whole narrative needs to be shot down by society. It doesn't matter what these people's ideologies are or what group they were part of. We need a united front, whether that's the media, whether that's the churches, whether that's the schools, people coming out and saying how disgusting and despicable this kind of act is. And it infuriates me that there are people who think that this violence, there's justification because maybe some words were used, or maybe someone didn't accept them in their life. And as hurtful as that is, there's no reason to murder innocent people.
One of the things that happens in these instances, and you know this all too well, is about 5 minutes after news breaks that a horrific shooting has happened, people are on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they're all over the place, and they're saying, we need gun control now. Enough of your thoughts and prayers. We need action. I mean, this is almost like a blueprint every time one of these events happens. What do you make of that? And what is it like for you? Again, look, you went through Columbine. A lot of other people did too. Different opinions and perspectives on this issue, but why do you think the go-to is immediately, we need gun control now, before we even really have details on what's happened?
Well, I honestly believe that there is a nefarious political ideology that pushes that agenda. And I think there are people who are either useful idiots that promote it, and so that's what they go to, or I think there's people who actually believe that gun control will solve the issue. And I think in all cases they're wrong. But it hijacks the conversation from actually talking about things that will protect our children, like the school safety measures, or even the mental health aspect of it. Unfortunately, that gets pushed aside every single time. There's a lot of other issues that we can talk about. Almost every single one of these. And another thing is, we don't talk about our education system. Every single one of these murderers is basically been raised by government schools, and every generation we continue down, the school system gets worse and worse with what they promote and celebrate. And so I think there's a lot of, it's a spiritual warfare, but I think there's a lot of tangible things that we can do. And I will say this real quick on the thoughts and prayers. I will tell you to keep praying, because it was the prayers of people praying for our community and us that really helped me through those times. It was praying that helped me. And I've seen so many prayers answered. I think of all the teachers that are carrying armed today. Those are prayers that I prayed. I never wanted anyone to go through this again. And I see these people learning a new skill, learning firearms, learning ways to eliminate threats and medical treatment. Those are prayers answered of things that I was praying for. So keep praying for the safety and security of our schools. And I think one day we will get there. and pray for people to help them through these struggling times, because I've seen it happen and I've seen it work.
Hmm. Yeah, that's powerful right there. And I was just going to ask you about, you lived through one of these horrific events, and the media chaos is just even more heightened since the time of the one that you were involved in took place. It's even a million times crazier right now, with everyone has a microphone, everyone has an outlet that they can, spout their opinion on this. But as someone who went through it, you talk about the prayers, but when you're in that mode of having experienced trauma like that, including the prayers, what was the most helpful sort of things around you? And how do you think it would have been different for you if you were around, if the social media and all of that noise was around at the time Columbine happened?
Yeah, that's a good question, that I've never really considered, because, that was, in 1999, there wasn't the social media and I didn't have a voice. And in fact, my voice when I did interviews was twisted and turned many times, and I couldn't rebuke any of the claims that were made by some media organizations. So I think there's social media is just like a firearm. It can be used for good or evil. And I think children now and teenagers need to have the same kind of, or, parents need to instill that same kind of respect and knowledge, and know how that explaining to them that this could be used for very good things and really bad things. And we've seen it. And so you have to use it carefully. And, but I think, you know, I think that the social media can, and my voice now has been heard because of social media. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to share my message or story without social media. So I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah. And, getting to know you as a friend over the years and watching you get married, and now you have kids, and really wondering, and I think people would wonder, you went through this unimaginable event as a teenager. You have lived a lot of that out in public, talking about it. You've taken, bold positions on a array of things from gun control down the line. What for you, when you look at this and you think, okay, I'm a parent now, I have my own kids, how has that experience impacted your decisions as a parent, even, and maybe decisions you haven't even made yet, but things you might do differently because of it?
Yeah, I know that I look at things a lot differently because of my experience. I know that I'm not sending my kids to public schools. And I'm making sure that they have the right education as far as what we want to bring up in our children. And so I investigate stuff. Kids these days, teenagers, we have the highest anxiety and depression rates. Um, we have suicide out of control. And these kids are, and for some reason, people think we have all these issues with our youth, and they think by eliminating guns, that's just going to solve the problem. We need to forget about the gun issue and start focusing on our families and focusing on our youth and our teenagers, because they are being attacked, I think, spiritually and mentally from all directions, from media to social media to at school. And I don't envy them. It's even more nefarious now than even when we were younger. And so I think there is a level of protection as parents that we really need to focus on more now than ever.
Absolutely. And before we let you go here, what would you say to those people right now, to those families who just went through this? They lost their loved one. They're where you were back in 1999, down in Nashville right now. What would be your message to them for just hope in the future?
Yeah, I know that life is never going to be the same, um, and uh, and it's hard to find answers. But I would say just turn to God, and I know that's what they're doing. Turn to each other, and I didn't imagine back then, as I looked forward when I was 15 years old, 16 years old, looking forward at my life, at the joy and happiness I would find with having a family and children, and the experiences and just the the opportunities I've had to help and serve other people. And so you never know where your life is going to lead. And so I would say, honor, grieve, and remember those lost, but remember that there's a God that loves you, and there are people who are praying.
All right. Well, good stuff there, Evan Todd. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us here today on Faith versus Culture and just sharing your experiences and your thoughts on this tough issue.
Thank you.
All right, we are back here on Faith versus Culture. Dan Andros here with Billy Hallowell. We just talked to Evan Todd. Really interesting to hear his perspective, Billy. I mean, he shared a lot of interesting insights as someone who survived one of these horrible shootings.
Yeah, I mean, the unimaginable that you kind of go through and then moving forward. I mean, being able to move forward, not everybody is okay after. And he said to the victims, like, your life might never be the same again. And I think that is something we have to pray for and understand. But his perspective is unique, and not everyone's going to agree with him on every part of it. But I definitely think the school security, all of those things are huge issues that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah, and I like what he said about prayer and how much that carried him through during that time, because as you noted, Billy, the media, a lot of people scoffing at prayer and saying, oh, so much for your thoughts and prayers. We need action. But here's at least one person saying, hey, all of those prayers from the country praying for us, lifting us up, that's what got me through. I think that was really powerful.
Absolutely. And we've known each other since we were 16. So I've watched him go through that. And it is powerful to hear him say that, because his life has really moved forward in an incredible way. And, that's what we have to pray for everybody else who's dealing with this right now.
Absolutely. All right. We are going to be back to wrap it up on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. Back in a sec. All right, that is all the time we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture. As always, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be praying for you as you go throughout your week. God bless, and we'll see you next time.